This E3, for the finale of their show, Square Enix showed off a Neo-inspired Final Fantasy spin-off with one of the funniest trailers I've ever seen live. Then, at the end of the trailer, a demo was released that was broken for 2 days. So, after it was fixed, I played through it multiple times until I reached max level. Because, well, I don't know why. Upon booting up the demo, the first thing you notice is that the game looks like crap and runs terribly. I mean, seriously, this looks like a late generation PS3 game, and then you look at the main character, which is just some guy in a t-shirt, but then you get some clothes for him and he looks like a character in a fantasy game along with his 2 allies. The story of the game is like a retelling of Final Fantasy 1, and the director said in an interview that the character names matter. As someone who's familiar with the original Final Fantasy, I'm glad to see a new take, but this is ridiculous. The game feels as though the story it's telling and the world are dark and edgy, but it comes off as laughable, and in my opinion, I would have liked the game better if it took a more colorful approach and felt more like an 80s fantasy movie than a serious retelling of a game with little story. I mean, the game isn't out. Maybe by the end of the story it's really good and it is entertaining, but right now it just feels bland, which cannot be said about the combat. Combat in this game is like a mix between Dark Souls and Sekiro. You have a standard attack, charged attack, and combos, which are also an integral part of the game, as they allow you to keep enemies in hit stun longer at the cost of some of your mana. You have 3 options for your defense. A block that drains your break gauge, and if it reaches 0, you are defenseless for a few seconds. And parrying, which is kinda weird, where most action games of this style reward you for parrying and mastering enemy patterns to find the few milliseconds where you can block a move and get an attack in. Final Fantasy Origins often punishes you for it, because even if you do several perfect parries in a row, it still drains your break gauge, meaning if you parry too many attacks too quickly, it has the same effect as if you just blocked them all. The parry also has the ability to absorb enemy projectiles, which you can throw back at them, but if you block these projectiles, they can still do a little bit of chip damage. The third and final option is just dodging. When hitting the X button, you do a little dash, and if you hit it twice, you do a roll, which is safer, but won't give you as much time to counterattack. Dodging has no effect on your break meter, and since there is no stamina bar, you can just roll and dash all you want. So many times, I just found myself dodging attacks, and if I ever felt I was in danger, I would just block and compose myself. Magic is also an important part of the game, as with the Mage Job class you can cast spells that do a massive amount of damage, even when they're not charged, but I have a feeling this will be nerfed before the final release. The player also has a super move, which I have experimented with, and it seems to do very little and waste a lot of your mana, so I didn't use it much and just stuck to my combos. Along with your abilities, you also have allies on your side, but they aren't important, as they don't do much damage and you can't command them, so often they just run in and do 13 damage and then get killed by the enemy. In the aforementioned interview with the director, he mentions that these allies will have the ability to equip different items, but didn't say anything about being able to send commands to them. I think it would be nice if we could at least have a system where we could tell our partners to either attack or retreat, but I guess if they have decent gear, that could also be of help. Enemies in Final Fantasy Origin are created by these weird spawner things that you fight to stop enemies from spawning. The different enemy types consist of a goblin who is not very threatening, and his attacks are pretty easy to dodge or parry. And this enemy type is only used in the beginning of the demo, so I feel he'll be phased out quickly in the main game, and just be used as a practice tool for new players to get used to. Next up is the bomb, which is a sentient fireball that shoots fireballs at you, which you can absorb and throw back at him. If you hit him once with his own projectile, he will start to grow, but if you hit him with a second fireball as he is growing, he will self-destruct, dealing massive damage to those around him. The third enemy is a wolf, and these often come in packs, and when you are introduced to them, you have to fight like 15 of them in a room, so good game design. The fourth enemy you encounter is a bat, and he is by far the most annoying. The bat flies in the air and swings down at you, dealing a decent amount of damage, or he can float down to your level and hit you with an area of effect move that keeps you stun locked. This is a problem when you are fighting one bat, but you often fight 3 at a time, leaving one to stun you while the other 2 hit you then run away. And because of how fast they are, and since you don't have a quick ranged attack, these are a pain to fight and not fun. The fifth enemy type is a skeleton, which is like a goblin, but it has an unblockable attack where he stabs you. This can be avoided, but be warned you can't just dodge this during the startup, as the skeleton will course correct mid-charge and grab you. Then there's the final enemy type of the demo, the griffin, which is an optional fight, but it's not that hard. The trick here is not to focus on the health bar, but instead pay attention to the guard and hit it with magic until the armor comes off, leaving it vulnerable. Then just rush in and finish the job. All these enemies have break meters, so you don't have to lower their health down to 0. You can instead just deal enough damage in a short amount of time to do a finisher move, which from my experience has very little to no benefits to the player. I want to quickly talk about the enemy placement, which I mentioned a bit before with the wolves, but when the game throws 2 or 3 harder enemies into a room, it excels. The combat's fast and fun, but when you throw me into a room with 15 wolves that die in 5 hits, it's not fun. Because 1, the game runs like crap, and 2, because most of the time, I just have to put the enemies in a conga line as to not be overwhelmed and take my time analyzing when the perfect time to strike is, which, I mean, look at this. Try to tell me when to attack as to not get hit. I mean, this is ridiculous. Then there's a room near the boss where you have to get a key, and I hate it. You have to fight 2 bats and 3 skeletons, and it just feels so clunky and janky to the point where every time I played the demo, I dreaded this encounter the most. Now, onto the exploration. While watching the footage, I'm sure you've noticed just how dark this game is, not from just a story perspective, but also in terms of the environments. So when going around and exploring the environment, I couldn't appreciate all the environmental design. The only thing that brightens up these areas are these little cubes, which act like the bonfires from Dark Souls, and respawn all of the enemies and allow you to level up your character. The way that leveling works in this game is that sometimes whenever enemies die, they will drop gear, which you can replace and build your character around. But instead of having one central level up bar, you have jobs. And the way these work is, when you have a certain job active, like a greatsword or a lancer, and you kill an enemy while you have that job active and using that weapon, you gain XP for that job, which unlocks combos for you and can boost your base stats. Then, whenever you've leveled up a job enough to reach the bottom of the tree, you can unlock an extension of that class, like a warrior or a dragoon. So, whenever you're fighting enemies, it always feels like you're gaining power and you're getting stronger, although I do prefer the traditional level bar. I would like it if there was a mix between the two, where job class would be focused on gaining combos and you could still have the Souls-like level up system where you choose your stats. I also did a lot of exploring during this demo, and I only found 1 or 2 secret areas in the level with optional challenges and loot. This may change later in the game with more branching paths, but as this is just the beginning of the game, who knows. Coming from the Nioh devs though, I bet that there will be optional challenges in a menu, but not in the games themselves. All of this leads into the boss fight of the demo. Chaos. This is a souped up version of Garland, who was the first boss in the Final Fantasy franchise, and while you fight him, his name is displayed as Chaos. During the first phase of this fight, Chaos can swing his sword at you, throw a fireball, or jump into the air and throw down a hail of ice at you. Chaos also has an ability that lights his sword on fire. This makes the sword do magic damage, so even if you block it, the sword will still do chip damage. But as his animations are still the same, you can dodge most of these pretty easily. After the fire ability burns out, Chaos uses a move called Inferno, which gets rid of his sword enchant, and makes a fire explosion occur, which has an area of effect. This also leaves him vulnerable for a few seconds. He also has one ranged attack during this phase where he throws a singular fireball. After a while of fighting Chaos, he has his guard broken, leading to a cinematic which starts the second phase of the fight. During this phase, Chaos fights with his hands and lightning attacks. He can summon fireballs, but this time he can summon 2. He can also use an area move that is smaller than the fire area move that's hitbox is kind of weird. And the biggest change is now Garland has an unblockable attack that has very big range. And instead of a fire sword, now he has an ice sword. This is pretty much the same as the fire moves, but they are faster, and now there is an ice move that deals a lot of damage and keeps you in a stun lock. Once the ice sword ability cools down, there is another area of effect attack. But this one is much larger than the fire sword move. My main problem with this boss is during the second phase when he has his ice sword out, he attacks very fast, and if you get hit by one of his moves, you're more than likely going to get hit by all 3, even if you're spamming the roll button. This can be remedied, however, if you just hold block during attacks you haven't learned, and just keep an eye on your break gauge. After the fight, you kill Chaos, and the demo is over. But this is only the ending of the normal mode. I've played through hard mode about 5 times, and the only big difference is that regular enemies just deal more damage and have more health, which I'm not a fan of, as I think it ruins the flow of combat and makes some battles very stale. The only other difference I can notice is that Chaos can use his unblockable during the first phase of the fight, but if you played on normal, you got used to doing this, so it's not a big deal. Overall, I would say while this game is very rough and still needs a pretty good bit of development time, I enjoyed it, and with the release date being next year, I hope that the team can iron out some of the kinks and make this a worthy Final Fantasy spinoff. I'll more than likely be playing this game through to completion when it comes out, and might make some more content around it if any big news or demos come up. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and leave a like, as it really helps smaller creators such as myself get noticed. Thanks for watching.